I could hear the knife scrape against the cutting board when he said it, flat, final, like a business deal closing. "Mom, it's time you moved somewhere more manageable." The words didn't land all at once. They drifted across the kitchen like the smell of burnt toast, slow and suffocating. The morning light poured through the window, soft and gold, touching everything except the place where I stood. My son Evan sat at the table with his elbows on the polished wood, looking too comfortable for what he was about to do. I remember thinking how much he looked like his father. Same calm eyes, same posture, but the resemblance stopped there. Henry would never have spoken to me in that tone. Lindsay hovered by the sink, pretending to rinse dishes that were already spotless. She'd always been good at pretending. "I'm 72. "Not 7,200, I said quietly, setting down the knife. "I can still climb stairs, Evan." He smiled, that polite, managerial smile of his, the one he used when firing someone without saying the word. "It's not about that, Mom. The house is too big for you alone. Lindsay and I were talking. Well, mostly Lindsay. And we just think it's time to modernize. Maybe rent it out or monetize," Lindsay said, still not looking at me. "There's a real opportunity here. Asheville property values are through the roof." Her voice was bright, casual, but her knuckles were white against the countertop. I could see her reflection in the window, eyes darting toward Evan as if to confirm he was still backing her up. My throat tightened. "Modernize? Monetize? This is my home, not a brand strategy." Evan sighed, leaning back. "Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be. You'll be more comfortable somewhere smaller, maybe near town. We'll help you set it up. You won't have to worry about maintenance, the yard, all of that." He said it like he was offering kindness, like pushing me out of my own home was a favor. I looked around the kitchen, the same one Henry and I built with our own hands in 1978. The cabinets he sanded until midnight because we couldn't afford new ones. The window frame we painted sky blue so it would match the morning light. I could still see the faint stain on the wall from where Evan spilled blackberry jam as a boy. He was 5 then, and I'd laughed instead of scolded him. Now he couldn't even meet my eyes. "I didn't realize I'd become a problem to manage," I said. Evan rubbed his forehead, the way he always did when he thought someone was being unreasonable. "Don't be dramatic, Mom. We just want what's best for you." Lindsay turned, finally facing me. Her smile was stretched too thin. "We were thinking we could renovate, open it up, maybe turn it into a short-term rental. It's such a waste for it to just sit here." "A waste," I repeated, the word sharp on my tongue. 45 years in this house, and it's a waste. Silence settled like dust. Somewhere outside, a woodpecker tapped against the peach tree. Evan stood, slipping his phone into his pocket. "We'll figure out the logistics. No rush, but maybe start sorting through things. The realtor Lindsay knows is really good." And just like that, he was walking toward the door. The conversation, my eviction, was done. Lindsay followed, murmuring something about dinner plans. The screen door closed with a soft click that echoed louder than a slammed one ever could. For a long time, I didn't move. The smell of coffee filled the room, rich and bitter. I stared at the sunlight crawling across the table, at the empty chair where my son had just sat. There was a time when he'd bring me wildflowers from the yard, sticky-fingered and grinning, asking if I liked them. I'd tuck them into a mason jar and tell him they were perfect. Now he wanted to modernize the land where those flowers still grew. Resentment isn't loud. It's quiet, steady. It seeps in like cold air under a door, unnoticed until you start to shiver. Every word he'd said replayed in my mind. Manageable, monetize, waste. Each one felt like a little nail sealing a box I hadn't agreed to climb into. I wiped the counter that didn't need wiping and opened the window just to breathe. Outside, the mountains rolled in shades of blue and gray, the same view Henry and I used to sit and watch every evening after dinner. "We built this with our own 2 hands, he'd say, pride warming his voice. "They can take a lot from you in this life, Mags, but not what you build yourself." He was right. They could not take what I built. unless I handed it to them. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking time that suddenly felt heavier. I thought about the ledger in my nightstand drawer, the one where I'd written down every loan, every gift I'd given Evan over the years. His first car, his college debt, the down payment for his house, every check signed with love that turned quietly into expectation. Maybe this was my fault. Maybe I had taught him that I was disposable, that I existed to give. A truck passed by outside, the sound fading into the hum of cicadas. The house creaked, familiar, like it was reminding me it was still alive, still mine. I pressed my palm against the kitchen wall. The wood was warm under my hand, as if the years we'd spent here had left a heartbeat inside it. "They think I'm leaving you," I whispered, my voice steady now, "but they don't know me as well as they think." And in that moment, beneath the soft rustle of the mountain breeze through the window, something inside me settled. Not anger, not grief, just certainty. They had given me my decision without realizing it. That night, the house felt different, quieter in a way that made every sound echo. I sat on the edge of my bed, still in my daytime clothes, listening to the hum of the old heater and the wind brushing against the window panes. I couldn't bring myself to turn on the television. It felt wrong to fill the silence with noise when my mind was already too full. Every word Evan had said replayed like a song I couldn't turn off. Manageable, modernize, monetize. Each one scraped against me like sandpaper. He hadn't even said, "your home." He'd said, "the house," like it was some property on a spreadsheet, not the place that held our entire life. I looked around my bedroom at the old quilt Henry's mother had sewn for us as a wedding gift. The fabric was faded in places, but I could still see the small stitches, steady and patient. That quilt had been on our bed since 1976. It had outlasted fads, storms, and even Henry himself. I ran my hand across it, remembering the night we brought it into this room, a room that didn't even have electricity yet. We had used lanterns back then, laughing as we tried to hang curtains on nails that kept bending. Henry had turned to me, dust on his face, and said, "We'll make it beautiful, Mags. You'll see." And we did. I got up and went to the window. The mountains were just dark shapes now, but I could still make out the faint outline of the peach tree Henry planted the year Evan was born. He said it would be a way for Evan to grow up with roots. I smiled at the memory, then felt the sting of resentment return, sharp and cold. That same boy who used to chase butterflies under that tree now wanted to sell it for monetization. My own son. The thought made my chest tighten. I walked to the old dresser and opened the top drawer. Inside was a box filled with bits of our life. Henry's old fishing license, a few yellowed letters, a Polaroid of us standing in front of the unfinished porch, and the ledger where I kept every bill, every note, every payment we ever made. I flipped it open. The first page read 1976 down payment $3,500. That was everything we had then. I could still remember standing in the bank with Henry, holding hands so tightly my knuckles turned white, hoping the loan would go through. When we finally signed those papers, he whispered, "We're building more than a house, Maggie. We're building a life." We built it piece by piece. I remembered mixing concrete by hand, hauling water from the creek when the well wasn't ready yet. I remembered the way the sawdust stuck to our clothes, the way we fell asleep on the floor the first night because we didn't have a bed yet. That house was sweat and laughter, arguments and forgiveness. Every nail in it carried a story. And now, my son wanted to strip it of all that and turn it into someone's weekend rental. I sat down again, holding the ledger on my lap. I turned to the back pages where I'd recorded the money I'd given Evan over the years. $4,000. First car. $10,000. Student loans. $9,000. Down payment. The numbers blurred as I read them. I hadn't written them to keep score, only to remember what I had done for love. But now they felt like proof that I had raised a man who saw generosity as weakness. He had taken, and I had let him. Each dollar had been another thread tying me to him, and now he wanted to cut the cord completely. My anger wasn't loud. It wasn't the kind that makes you shout. It was the kind that settles deep, solid, and unshakable. I wasn't angry that he wanted me to move. I was angry that he couldn't see the difference between a house and a home, between profit and pride. Lindsay's voice echoed in my memory, too, soft and practiced. It's such a waste for it to just sit here. Waste. As if all those years of living and loving had been nothing but clutter to her. She had no idea what had been built here, what had been lost and found within these walls. I could feel resentment tightening in my chest like a knot, not just at her, but at myself, forever letting them believe they had the right to decide my worth. I looked around the room again. The old rocking chair by the window, Henry's worn flannel shirt still hanging on the back of the door, the faint scent of lavender from the sachet I'd kept in the closet for decades. Everything in this room told a story, and I wasn't done living in it. My fingers brushed against the folded deed inside the ledger, the one marked paid in full. Seeing it there sparked something inside me. They thought I needed their help, but they had forgotten one thing. This house was mine. Legally, fully, completely mine. I closed the ledger, feeling steadier than I had all day. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, the same sound Henry used to call mountain music. For the first time in years, I felt like I was hearing it clearly. They wanted me gone, but they didn't understand who they were dealing with. I wasn't leaving. Not yet. Not ever on their terms. That night, I didn't sleep. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, the old clock ticking beside me, and somewhere between one breath and the next, I made a quiet promise to myself. They might take everything they could, but they would never take the home I built with my own hands. Rain came that afternoon, steady and cold, washing the dust from the peach tree outside. I stood on the porch watching the water run in small rivers down the gravel path, feeling the same strange calm that had been sitting inside me since that morning. It had been 3 days since Evan's visit, and I hadn't heard a word from him or Lindsay, not a text, not a call. I suppose they thought the matter was settled, that I would start packing my things and looking for somewhere more manageable, but I wasn't packing. I was planning. Quietly, carefully, the way Henry and I used to draw up blueprints before building anything worth keeping. I sat at the old oak desk in the study, the rain tapping softly against the window. The desk still smelled faintly of pine from the varnish Henry used years ago. I opened the top drawer and took out the phone book, flipping through pages yellowed with time until I found her name, Caroline Dunn. We'd sung together in the church choir for 20 years before she retired and started a small real estate business. Caroline was the kind of woman who never asked why you were calling until after she'd already poured herself a cup of coffee. I dialed her number, the phone heavy and cool in my hand. "Maggie Rowe," she said, her voice warm and familiar. "Haven't heard that name in too long." "I need your help, Caroline," I said, "but I need it quiet." The pause on the other end was brief but meaningful. "All right," she said finally. "Quiet I can do." We talked for nearly an hour. I explained that I wanted to sell the house. No signs, no open houses, no word of it getting around. Just one careful buyer, the kind who would love it the way I had. Caroline didn't press for reasons, but she asked the right questions, the ones that made me realize how sure I already was. When we hung up, she promised to start making discreet calls. I sat there for a long while after, listening to the rain, feeling the smallest flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time: control. Later that evening, I went through the old files Henry and I had kept in the hall cabinet. Receipts, letters, photographs, tax forms, the paperwork of a lifetime. My hands moved slowly, tracing each paper like it was part of a story only I could still read. Near the bottom of the pile, I found a worn envelope. Inside was a note Henry had written me in 1981 when he first got sick. The ink had faded, but his words were still strong. "If something ever happens to me, promise me you'll keep what we built safe." I read that line 3 times before folding the paper back into the envelope. That's when the first tear came. Not because I was sad, but because I realized I had been holding my promise all these years, even when no one else remembered it. The next morning, Caroline came by. She looked the same as always, hair pinned back, a scarf around her neck, eyes sharp but kind. We sat in the kitchen over coffee while the clouds cleared outside. "You sure about this, Maggie?" she asked, stirring sugar into her cup. "More sure than I've been about anything in years," I said. She nodded, scribbling notes on her pad. "All right. I'll bring only the ones who understand a house like this, the kind who see soul, not square footage." That was why I'd called her. She understood that a home isn't a business deal, it's a life. That night, as I cleaned out the drawers in the living room, I found another reminder of how much I had given away. Old check stubs, bank transfers, all in Evan's name. I ran my finger down the list: car, tuition, wedding, mortgage. I'd given him everything he needed to stand tall, but somewhere along the way, I'd taught him that I would always kneel first. The thought burned, but it didn't break me. It clarified things. I could have yelled, could have called him and asked how he could do this to his own mother, but I didn't. I stayed silent. For him. Because if he ever remembered what love was supposed to look like, I wanted him to know I hadn't thrown it away. A few days later, Caroline called. "I've got someone I think you'll like," she said. "They're not flippers. They're a couple from Tennessee, early retirement, looking for something quiet. They don't want to change a thing." When she brought Nora and Frank Whitman to see the house, I stayed in the kitchen while they walked through. I could hear their footsteps creak across the floorboards, the same ones Henry had installed himself. I heard Nora say softly, "It feels like this place has a heartbeat." That one sentence decided everything. When they returned to the kitchen, I looked at them and knew I'd found the right people. They smiled at me like they understood what this meant. They made a full-price offer that afternoon, and I added 2 small conditions. They couldn't make major renovations for 1 year, and I wanted one last morning alone here. They agreed without hesitation. When I signed the papers, I transferred the money into a private trust, not for Evan, not for Lindsay, but for Lila, my granddaughter. She's the only one who ever asks me to tell stories about when her granddad built the porch or how the house got its blue window frames. Maybe one day she'll understand why I did this. As I packed, I kept only what mattered: Henry's fishing journal, my mother's quilt, and one photograph of Evan as a boy with jam on his chin, smiling at the camera. I placed the sale documents in an envelope and wrote his name on the front. Inside, I added Caroline's card. No explanations, just facts. That evening, the rain returned, soft and steady, wrapping the house in a sound that felt like goodbye. I stood in the doorway for a long time, the air cool against my face. I thought about the boy who once ran barefoot through this yard and the man who now saw it as an investment. Then I thought about Henry's promise, and my own. I could have stayed silent and let them take everything, but I didn't. I chose something better. I chose myself, quietly, completely. The morning after the sale closed, I woke up before sunrise. The house was quiet, stripped down to what it had been in the beginning: wood, light, and air. I walked barefoot through each room, letting my hand rest on the walls, as if saying goodbye to an old friend. The air smelled faintly of lemon oil and rain from the night before. It wasn't sadness I felt, not exactly. It was something closer to relief. For the first time in years, I had no reason to rush, no one to answer to, no duty pressing on my shoulders. By noon, Caroline had called to confirm the buyers were thrilled. "They love the place, Maggie," she said. "They said they can't wait to move in." I thanked her and hung up, slipping the phone into my purse. I left the envelope for Evan on the kitchen counter, neatly sealed, his name written in careful blue ink. I didn't add a note. I didn't owe him one. I drove into town and checked into a small inn near Hendersonville. The clerk didn't recognize me, and that anonymity felt like freedom. I signed the register using my maiden name, Hart, and when he handed me the key, he smiled politely without a trace of recognition. That small kindness, being seen without being known, brought tears to my eyes before I could stop them. I spent the next day walking through the quiet streets, stopping at a diner for coffee and a slice of peach pie. It reminded me of simpler times, back when Evan was little and thought a 10-cent candy bar was a treasure. I almost smiled, but then I remembered how he had looked at me that morning in the kitchen, patient, polite, and utterly detached, as if I were a problem to solve, not a mother to love. By evening, my phone started buzzing. First one message, then another. Evan. The words popped up on the screen in a blur of panic. "Mom, what's going on? Why is there a sold sign out front?" A moment later, another. "Where are you? We need to talk. This isn't funny." Lindsay's text followed. Short, sharp, almost cold. "You had no right to do this without discussing it with us." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I set the phone face down on the nightstand and sat quietly, listening to the sound of rain hitting the window. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from something deeper. The release of years of quiet resentment. Every demand, every condescending word, every time they had dismissed me as fragile or outdated came rushing back. Only now I didn't feel weak. I felt powerful in my silence. The next morning, the calls began, dozens of them. I let them ring. The voicemails came one after another. Evan's voice breaking between confusion and anger, Lindsay's clipped tone trying to sound composed. "Mom, you've created a mess," she said. "You need to call us back. We can fix this." That word, fix, nearly made me laugh. For years, I had been the one fixing everything. The broken pipes, the forgotten bills, the family fights. And now, the one thing I'd done for myself was the one thing they couldn't undo. By afternoon, Caroline called again. "Your son stopped by my office," she said softly. "He wanted answers. I told him the sale was final." I could hear the hesitation in her voice. "He's upset, Maggie." "I'm sure he is," I replied. "He lost something he thought he owned." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling of the small inn room, listening to the hum of the air conditioner. The weight of the past 45 years sat with me. The meals cooked, the birthdays remembered, the quiet sacrifices that had gone unnoticed. It wasn't just about the house. It was about all the ways I had made myself smaller so others could feel comfortable. I had spent decades giving, forgiving, and explaining. And now, finally, there was nothing left to explain. 2 days later, Evan showed up at the inn. I saw him through the lace curtain before he even knocked. His shoulders were tight, his jaw clenched, his eyes frantic. I didn't open the door. He called my name once, then again, louder this time. "Mom, please, you can't just disappear like this." His voice cracked, and for a brief second I almost gave in. But I stayed silent. He knocked a few more times, then walked away. The sound of his car starting was the longest noise I'd ever heard fade. After he left, I stood by the window for a long time, watching the rain begin again, light and steady. I didn't feel guilty. I felt something better. Peace. They would call it betrayal. They would tell people I'd lost my mind. But deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't cruelty. It was balance. For years, I'd been the quiet glue holding everything together, and they never noticed until I stopped sticking to their rules. Now, for once, the silence was mine, not theirs. And it was beautiful. A week passed before I opened my phone again. By then, the flood of messages had slowed, replaced by short, clipped ones that sounded less like concern and more like damage control. Evan had gone from pleading to demanding. "Mom, this isn't right." Then, "We can fix this if you'll just call me." Finally, "You've ruined everything." Each word landed like a cold pebble dropped in a still pond, sharp, precise, designed to make ripples. I sat in the diner where I'd eaten breakfast the first morning after I left, the same corner booth, same chipped mug of black coffee. The waitress, a kind woman with silver hair, didn't ask questions. She just smiled and topped off my cup. That small act of kindness hit harder than any apology I'd ever received from my own family. It reminded me that decency often came from strangers, not from those who claimed to love you. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was Lindsay. Her message was long, too long, full of words like confused, hurt, and family. She said they were worried about me, that people were starting to talk. Then she slipped in. The real reason. Evan had plans for that house. It could have set us up for years. I read that line 3 times, the words heavy with everything she didn't say. You took something that wasn't yours to take. I stared out the window, the mountains rising in the distance, soft blue against the morning sky. I thought about how many times I'd given in before, how many times I'd smoothed things over just to keep the peace. But this time, there was nothing to smooth. The house was gone, the papers signed, the money locked away where they couldn't touch it. They couldn't fix this, and they hated that more than anything. That afternoon, Caroline called. They came by again, she said quietly. Your son was polite at first. Then he got angry, said you blindsided them. I smiled sadly. He's right about that part. Maggie, you sure you're all right? She asked gently. I'm better than I've been in years, I said. It just took losing everything they wanted for me to find what I needed. After the call, I sat on the bed in the small inn room, staring at the photo of Evan as a boy, missing front teeth, jelly on his cheek, sunlight catching in his hair. I remembered the way he used to run to me after falling, how he'd cling to my leg until the hurt passed. That little boy had trusted me completely. I wondered when he'd stopped seeing me as home and started seeing me as property. That night, I got another message from him. This one was shorter. You went too far. I don't know if I can forgive you. I read it once, then set the phone down. My hands didn't shake this time. Forgiveness. That was the language of people who thought they still had power, but I didn't need forgiveness for saving myself. I had already spent my entire life asking for permission to matter. That part of me was gone. The next morning, the diner was quiet. The waitress brought my usual order, eggs, coffee, and toast, and placed a small white envelope beside it. This came for you, she said. Inside was a handwritten note from Carolyn. Nora and Frank moved in today. They love the place. Said it feels like home already. Tucked inside was a small photo of the Whitmans standing on the porch, smiling. The peach tree behind them was in bloom. I held that picture for a long time. It didn't make me sad. It made me proud. I hadn't destroyed a home. I'd passed it to someone who would protect it. Later that afternoon, I went for a walk up the hill behind the inn. The air smelled like wet leaves and wood smoke, the kind of scent that makes you feel grounded. At the top, I looked out over the valley, the mountains stretching wide and endless. The ache that had lived in my chest for so long felt lighter. I wasn't angry anymore, just free. My phone buzzed again, one last time, another message from Evan. We drove by the house today. It looked different. I don't understand you. I typed slowly, choosing each word with care. You don't have to, son. One day, Lila will. Then I turned off the phone and slipped it into my pocket. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. The world felt big again, full of quiet possibilities. I stood there, breathing in the cool air, knowing I didn't owe anyone an explanation for choosing peace. For once, I wasn't the supporting beam holding everyone else up. I was the foundation of my own life, steady and whole. Some people will say what I did was heartless. Maybe they're right. But sometimes love isn't about giving more. It's about stopping the taking. And as the wind swept through the trees and the last bit of light touched my face, I whispered the truth that had taken me 72 years to learn. You don't have to deserve love. You just have to stop waiting for people who don't know how to give it.